We have the right to self-government, to self-determination of land. And the people that are here are going to go back and continue the struggle. This is not an end, it's only a beginning.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of The True Canadians, the podcast. I'm your host, David Wylynko. The podcast is named for the book, The True Canadians, of which I am the co-author, along with the Métis writer, Patricia Russell. And today, we have the good fortune of being joined by Juanita Marois, CEO of Métis Crossing, and Alberta rancher Len Hrehorets. So we're here at Métis Crossing talking about The Return of the Wild, vignette from the book, The True Canadians. And what we're dying to know right off the top, and either of you can jump in and give the background, is how did this, broadly come about?
Well, I'll start from a Métis Crossing side, and then Len can speak from his side as well. So Métis Crossing, we bought the property, as you know, in 2001. And very early on, we did conversations with many of our elders and our entrepreneurs, really talking about what do we want people to know, what do we want them to feel, and how do we fundamentally change worldviews here at Métis Crossing. And we always knew that buffalo were a foundational piece of the story that we needed to share here at Métis Crossing. But we didn't know how to do it. So we started with what we did know. So we started to build our gathering center, and we had a plan of what we were going to do next. And as we were working through that plan, Len Hrehorets walked through the front door of the gathering center and said, I think I have something that I want to show you. And I think there's something we can do together. So from that moment on, Len and I started working together. He took me, showed me his 2,000 acres and his original Visions, Hopes, and Dreams park on his own ranch. And we started talking about how we can create visions, hopes, and dreams at Métis Crossing Wildlife Park.
So, Len, you walked through the front door. Obviously, the idea didn't just occur to you while you were pulling into the parking lot. So what was it that brought this idea to your thinking and then bringing it to Juanita's attention?
Basically, like I had a vision. I built my own wildlife park, but I just didn't go out and do it all. I put up the fencing, I put up the wildlife, and it's a beautiful park, but just put it in a smaller scale and working with Métis Crossing, I had a vision, and basically that's where it come from, vision, hopes, and dreams. So my vision, my dream, and my hope was to work with the Métis Crossing and building a park. And I walked through the front door, and not very many people heard of white bison or white elk. And I took the directors for a tour of my wildlife park, and everybody was excited. They never seen stuff like this. And then we sat down and we said, you know what, I got joining land and the Métis have their land, and let's build a wildlife park and introducing the bison, all different breeds, the plains, the woods, and white bison, introducing them right at Métis Crossing. And it'd be something that the Métis Crossing wanted to do, is introduce the bison back. And then that's how we carried through. And I had all the technology, building all the fences and working in bison. I've been in the bison industry for 40 years. I know lots about bison. They're amazing animals. And from there on, it was vision, hopes, and dreams at Métis Crossing, and we built the park. We introduced the bison, and it's all here today.
I'm very curious because part of the reason for the book was to reach out to Métis and to teach them about their own history and their culture, but also non-Métis. So we've been on this cross-country tour talking to people and having book events, and a lot of people have come and they still think, oh, the Métis, oh, that's Louis Riel, like the French Revolution, oh, Napoleon, What did you know of the Métis? Why did it come to you that that's an initiative that you wanted to pursue?
That's a big loaded question. Basically, like I say, working with Juanita for the last 2-3 years now, it'll be 3 years, they have all the like the computers, the advertising, everything else. I did, like I say, built a park, and when I built the park, it just goes a little bit of history. Is my daughter was in a serious accident, and she was in a wheelchair, and she's paralyzed waist down. And basically, I figured I'll build this park at my ranch, and I couldn't go through it all. I didn't know what to do. and working with Juanita and her crew. And we put this thing together that basically we give tours. I supplied the animals and everything else, and we give tours for everybody. And it's a great park. I mean, every time I drive through it, we built it, and it's a great place.
The bison effectively disappeared. You brought them from, I believe, a national park to basically create a new herd. Talk to us about how the mechanics of that, because there was a lot of media attention when it occurred. I remember it was on the news. When I was researching with Patricia for the book, there was a lot of attention. You talked about how they almost seemed like they were home. They came out, I guess it was the back of a truck, or you can explain to us what the transportation vehicle was, and that they went up the hill and turned and kind of looked back at you. And maybe you can describe that moment and how you got from what Len was just talking about to that point.
I think I'll back up just a little bit to your point about Elk Island National Park. And the bison at one time roamed this land in the millions. They had an entirely different landscape here, actually, when they were roaming freely. And they went to the brink of extinction. So at one point in history, there were estimated only 200 animals left on Turtle Island. And with that, there was actually an Indigenous rancher, his name was Pablo, and he collected them and he started to bring them back. And at one point, it got bigger than he could handle. He went first to the American Park Service, and they said, no, we're not interested. And then he came to the Canadian National Park Service and offered them to him. And the Canadian National Parks, through what is now Elk Island National Park, brought those up here by train. If you can imagine, the last 200 remaining animals coming up to Canada by train. And then Elk Island National Park started the restoration of those herds. And now we have tens of thousands of bison in Alberta alone. And a lot of that has come through the work that was started at Elk Island, but also through the commercial ranching, through people like Len Hrehorets. So at Métis Crossing, we've benefited from both. So we had a transfer of pure wood bison from Elk Island National Park. But even before that, we worked with Len to create Visions, Hopes, and Dreams at Métis Crossing. And he prepared us to be able to receive these bison. And so it really took us 1.5 years to negotiate the relationship and how we were going to work together. Len talked about he knows bison, he had the technology, all of the equipment to build the fences. And then we are really working to take that and bring it to the human side. So how do we get visitors here? How do we share that? And then we planned a day, and it was September 25th, 2021, when we brought all the bison here and released them into Visions, Hopes, and Dreams at Métis Crossing. And I think, Len, what he wants to hear is the moment where you back that trailer up with the plains bison, which are the bison that would have naturally roamed here, and opened those trailer doors, and they ran up the hillside of Métis Crossing.
I can remember the day very well. When we backed everything, we had actually media was all out, and people were all standing outside the fence. We backed up our trailers to the plains paddock, and it's actually the bottom of a river flat. And then I said a few words just before to get pause, and I said the last time these bison walked these hills was in the 1860s, and today we're going to turn them loose, and they're going to walk these river hills again. And just when we opened the doors, the bison all ran out, and the cameramen and everybody were capturing that one moment, and you can see the people's tears in their eyes. The bison stopped on the crest of the hill, and they all looked back. And it was a moment, like people, you could not believe it. They could have kept on running, but they just ran up so far, and they just stopped and looked back. And it was, like a beautiful fall day. And the experience right there was phenomenal.
How do you, for lack of a better term, manage bison? Because, as you point out, hundreds of years ago, they would roam freely. And it's been argued and it's been depicted in illustrations and in literature that was part of the issue with the conflict between Louis Riel and John A. Macdonald. So they wanted to get this railway through, and a railway and bison don't mix. So we have an illustration in the book of a bison clashing and the railway, springing like this with Macdonald on one side and Riel on the other. So there's a real history there. But what people don't understand, because it's been so long, as you point out, is what is it required? You just let them loose, and there they go. They just carry on their own, or does there have to be some sort of maintenance, some kind of management?
Basically, the bison today, I cannot go back to the 1860s. They roamed, they're basically a wild animal. Today, the bison are domesticated. We work them every day, even in the park. We drive through the park. And bison learn because we're not a threat to them. We're not hunters, we're just tourists. By driving through a vehicle, it's quote, we have a thing, I settle all bison down. We play music. Actually, it's country music. And it's actually the bison. They're an animal, they get used to it, and they can hear the music. We're not a threat to them. And we can drive within 6 feet of any bison certain times of the year. Calving season, mothers are very protective. Breeding season, the bulls are they hold their ground. So you have to go around a bull. During breeding season, you don't go through it, you go around them. But again, we domesticated the bison that basically, they're used to us. If you brought in a wild herd of bison, they're not used to vehicles, they're not used to humans, they're really hard to work with. But today, we work with them every day, and they're getting easier and easier to.
You mentioned calves. I understand there was a monumental occurrence not too long ago of this herd actually calving, and that's pretty significant. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, I think the significance of that was that the Elk Island bison, which are the only ones in the park that Métis Crossing actually owns, all of the rest of the bison belong to Len. So this spring, we had our first 7 calves coming out of the Elk Island Park, which was wonderful for us. It's very symbolic for us as Indigenous people to be part of a herd that's reestablished back on this land base. It's symbolic as we too are reestablishing ourselves as an important force on this landscape.
I was going to ask that next, actually, there seems to be 2 components, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's sort of like the Métis, there's culture and history, and that must have like amazing significance in terms of bolstering the spirit and the sense of renewal, because the Métis were once upon a time fiercely proud, independent, economically self-sufficient people. And then there's the tourism side of it. So speak a little bit about that. How has this helped in both those fronts, and maybe there's a third I'm not thinking of?
Sure. So Métis people, and I talked before about the kinds of stories we wanted to share, and Métis Crossing is about sharing the past, the present, and the future of Métis people. So as we drive people through the bison herds, we talk about the buffalo hunt, we talk about the Buffalo Council in terms of our nationhood and our governance, and we talk about many things. And it's one thing to read about that or to see a slideshow about it, but when you're driving through Len's bison and you are right beside these animals, you begin to understand the majesty and the strength. And you think of a buffalo hunter or a team of buffalo hunters running these animals across the plains. You realize those were really moments of life and death. Those were moments of survival. Those were moments of these people having to work together in a very coordinated way. So yes, we had our own government. Yes, we had our own laws. Yes, we had our own economic systems. And that really comes to life as they drive through the bison today. But I think beyond that as well, we're really working with Len right now to continue to build that out in terms of being not only sustainable, but regenerative on this land base. So we want to work with Len to increase our land base and to sustainably grow our bison herds so that they can actually reestablish the natural prairie grasslands that would have been here and reestablish a diverse habitat back on these lands when all of us were roaming freely.
That's interesting, because we don't even appreciate, unless you're studying environmental sciences at the university, that the idea of there having been grasslands and then what it was like here. So when you speak about that, it sounds like it has an added, that third piece that I mentioned a moment ago, I wasn't sure about, is the environmental side of it, right? And renewal and conservation, which is important to young people, right? So you'd see that as being a significant aspect to this.
It is, and Len's amazing in the way he learns how to rotate the herds. So he's going to bring us his knowledge and his experience in terms of the number of bison that can sustainably be on a piece of land, what you need to look for as you're rotating them through. And he talks about it way better than I do. So
yes.
I'm just going to stop.
How do you rotate the bison? This is what I've been getting at. I was with you once not too long ago on one of these trips.
Basically, go back to the 1860s, bison actually migrated. They migrated their grass. They would go 50, 60 miles And basically 5-6 weeks, they'll leave this area and they'll graze it down, but they keep on migrating grass, and it's called managing. They would manage their own grass, which today, as a confined bison in pens like pastures, they don't migrate, but we do it called rotational grazing. So basically they would go in one area, they would stay 10 days, they'll go in another area, they stay 10 days, and then 40 days they come back to the original grass they started from. And it's lush, it's green, and it's like candy to them. They just love it. I mean, they come there and he says, wow, 40 days with the rains and everything, it's just super grass. And that's called rotation. But go back 160 years ago, it's migrating. They would leave the one area, go for 50 days, and that herd would work itself back to the same area, and then be lush grass growing back again. And like I said, they would manage their own grass. That's why they're just amazing animal. They did their own migrating for the grass, and they'll leave this for winter feeding. You will not even see it. But when the snow got deep, actually the bison come back to the low valleys, and they push with their heads. They push the snow side to side. There was a lot of fall grazing for it. And the older that matured, the cows and the bulls, they knew where all the grasses were. And the young ones would just fall. It's amazing animal.
They can graze in the wintertime.
They graze all winter. Basically, if we had our way, if we had a big block of pasture, a lot of grazing, everything else, bison, you won't have to feed them today. They know how to survive the winter. They know where the grasses are, the grasses that are good for them during the winter feeding. And summertime, they go on the shorter grass and leave the taller grass. And just amazing animal.
People are going to wonder how you know this. You use the word rancher, and then we just sort of end the conversation. Oh, so-and-so is a rancher, Len's a rancher. But well over 80% of Canadians live in an urban environment. And if they can't flick the switch, turn the lights on, or run the water out of a tap, they're lost. They got to call hydro or, So,
Surrey.
okay. So you know that as well. But how did you, what's the history for you? Is it in your family or like in the way?
No, basically I started 40 years ago. I bought only a handful of bison from a little 7 cows and 7 calves I bought, and just started with, they were just amazing animals. The mothers are very protective. They mother up really good. It's just amazing animal. And the babies stay alongside them. You can have, like today, we have a large herd of just under 1,500 mother cows. And actually she would run through a gate of fresher grass. And all of a sudden she looks, her baby is not alongside her. She would make a loop and the whole herd run back. They all sound the same. And basically they have an odor, of each one has an odor, and that calf just latches on just like a magnet. She would make a loop and grunt, and that calf, and they would just magnetize and just run back out through the gate again. It's amazing just to watch them. But today we manage that. I mean, it's not like we can let them graze thousands of acres. We manage the herds, smaller areas, more grass. And like I say, we're doing a grass management for me, which basically go back 160 years ago. They did it on their own.
We're talking with Len and Juanita at Métis Crossing. We'll be right back.
Hello, this is Audrey Petra. Today's podcast is about visions, hopes, and dreams. The buffalo paddock at Métis Crossing. We think about our history, and it always included the buffalo. I remember when we first had our very first visioning session with our citizens to talk about what should our cultural site include. And it was about a buffalo paddock. The drawing encompassed a buffalo paddock with buffalo roaming those hills, the very same hills they had roamed hundreds of years ago. And we talked about having a restaurant or a fast food outlet where we would serve buffalo burgers. But we knew that in order to fulfill those dreams, we needed partners. And we found a partner. We found a rancher right across the road from us that had buffalo and was very interested in working with us to create that buffalo paddock. He did a lot of work to help us fulfill our dream of that buffalo paddock. And today, that buffalo paddock is a key part of what has become our cultural site and also an international recognized tourist site. We are very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and there will be more at Métis Crossing.
So we're back with Len and Juanita, and Len, we were just talking there about your experience with moving bison, and it made me think it must be remarkable for people to come here, whether it's from elsewhere in Canada or abroad, and experience this. What does that look like in your experience? What have you found has been funny or interesting or unique about people coming and actually witnessing it for themselves?
Well, Dave, basically, we do get a lot of tourist companies, and that's where Juanita takes over. I'm just a VIP tour. I just do the driving and open the gates and give the guys the VIP tour of the park and answer any questions they want to know. And basically, we would drive in, and we had a tourist group out of Japan, was it?
Japan,
Yeah, out of Japan. And basically, they start loading all their cameras and lenses that were a 1.5 feet long. They have all their cameras out, and they did not speak no English. So basically, we had a translator, and I said, "What's all the lenses for?" He said, "Well, just for taking some really good pictures." And I told the interpreter, I says, "We are going to get within 6 feet of the bison." And then he replied back to the tour guides, and their eyes opened up, and we made a loop. And again, we drove within 6-7 feet. Lenses were coming off cameras, cell phones were coming out, and it was an amazing experience. They could not believe it. And I didn't understand what they were saying, but they were excited, like totally excited. They'd never seen this ever, to be so close to an animal that basically was extinct 106 years ago. And today you can drive within 6 feet, and it's just amazing.
I wonder how, that's not typical, obviously, at all. But the idea of people from abroad coming to Canada and experiencing things they haven't experienced, whether it's, skiing from a helicopter or, going to Jasper, or the amenities they have to avail themselves of there, or Banff, or Whistler, and so on, is quite unique. But, when you come over the bridge, you drive here, this place is especially unique in so many ways. And what would someone experience? What would they expect? How would they get here, and how long would they stay here? And maybe you want to touch on the domes, like the bison are part of a larger experience, right?
They are. Métis Crossing has, since 2018, had amazing success. And I think our success is due to kind of a perfect storm with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the UNDRIP, and I think really an international openness to hearing about Indigenous people and some of the challenges that we've faced, but more importantly, the contributions that we have made and we continue to make to Canada. For me, it's kind of a moment when I think about Métis people being called roadside allowance people and dirty half-breeds, and we were hiding in plain sight, and we didn't have a home and we didn't have a land. And after we released the animals into Visions, Hopes, and Dreams at Métis Crossing Wildlife Park, and we had the gathering center, and since then we've finished building our 40-room boutique lodge, and most recently our skywatching domes. And now internationally, we are known as one of the top destinations, not in Alberta, not in Canada, but in the world. People are voting us as the top destination in the world to learn about Indigenous people, to learn about connections to the land. We have an international scale wildlife park, which is really reconciliation in action when you have a non-Indigenous partner like Len Hrehorets. He's as Ukrainian as they come, working side by side with us as a Métis nation to develop things that are better together than either one of us could have done on our own. Len had a wildlife park, but he didn't know how to bring it to the world. He needed us to help him to bring that to the world. We knew we needed bison, but we didn't have any capacity to do that. We needed Len to bring the bison to us. So together we've created this thing that's unmatchable. And you add the lodge, the domes, the gathering center, the warmth, the culture of the Métis, and we have something that tourists, that people, that are guests are willing to travel around the world to experience.
Is it open year-round?
It is.
Can you see the bison year-round?
All year round. You can come in the springtime when the cows are calving. You can come in the fall time when the trees are turning colors. It's amazing. Then you can come here in the heart of the winter when there's a foot and a half of snow. And it's minus 30 temperature, and the buffalo running around like it's a day in the summer. And it's just amazing to see them in their winter hair, and it's something to see. It's all seasons.
I take it you don't go down to Florida in the wintertime.
Maybe once a year down to Arizona, but that's basically, this is as good as it gets. I mean, it's a beautiful country.
How do they, like, if you were going to come from Japan or Germany or elsewhere outside the country of Scandinavia, do you fly to Edmonton and come in a bus, or how does that work? I heard someone was mentioning helicopters one day.
This is the great thing about as we grow. We work a lot with our trade organizations like Travel Alberta, Destination Canada, Indigenous Tourism Alberta, Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. So people, when they're learning about Métis Crossing, they might go on our website themselves, or they might buy part of a tour package of which takes years. Can I just say the work that we put into the media that come and go on these tours, they talk about Métis Crossing, we meet the tour companies, we get put into packages, and then they sell the tours for us around the world. And people are generally flying into Edmonton, but we're also becoming an important part of rail packages. So people come to Canada and they either get on in Toronto or Vancouver, and they're taking the train across Canada, and they're choosing to get off in Edmonton or Vegreville to come to Métis Crossing. As we work with Travel Alberta and the Edmonton International Airport, we work with them to attract more direct flights into Edmonton. So with KLM and Condor and American Airlines having more direct flights here, we're doing this because they're having more of a reason to fly into Edmonton than ever before. And Métis Crossing and Visions, Hopes and Dreams at Métis Crossing are parts of that.
Well, being from Winnipeg and Ukrainian, I personally don't go to Edmonton to see the Oilers or the Elks very much, although they both played the other day. But driving up here is a treat. I mean, it's just, the landscape is beautiful. It's amazing. And you've been here your whole life, and your family?
Whole life. And the history of people that lived here before the Métis Crossing took over, the Cromartys and Mr. Schaefer that owned it. I knew the Cromartys before that. So basically my grandparents came here in 1906. So
I think a beautiful part about our history is in many places across Canada, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities may not have a relationship where they get along well, but Smoky Lake has been a very unique community historically, where the Métis people settled here. Obviously, our First Nations ancestors were there for decades, millennia before, but we settled here, and then the Ukrainians came after, and we openly talk about we worked together to build this community. There are many people, we had land that was donated, quote, sold to Métis Crossing at a very low price because she and her sister were Ukrainian, and the Métis people along the Victoria Trail had adopted her father, and he never would have survived without the support of the Métis families. And Len talks about his family and how they worked with us as well. So the collaboration that Len has with me and Métis Crossing and our directors goes back decades and generations.
Or hundreds of years. And maybe we'll touch on that, and I'll ask you just to take us a little bit down the memory lane, and then we'll finish talking about how you each feel about your thoughts for the future for here. So you can think about that while you're answering this question. Just up the road is Victoria Settlement. Or up that way. Okay. Juanita's pointing the other way. Like, just generally, why is it here? And I know the Victoria Settlement has a huge role to play with that, and we're on the North Saskatchewan River. Like, explain to us that history going all the way back that far.
We actually have archaeological dig sites that show this is the traditional meeting place, trading place for First Nations, and they would come from the north and they would come from the south and trade on this land base for millennia. And it's interesting because we're actually on the high point of the North Saskatchewan and the low point of the Athabasca rivers. So where we are is also the shortest point between those two major trade routes, which makes a lot of sense that this is where trade would happen, because they'd come either on the Athabasca or the North Saskatchewan and then come here to trade. Because the First Nations were already here trading on this land base, when the fur traders, the Hudson's Bay Company, came down the highway, which was the North Saskatchewan River here, hundreds of years ago, they found that the First Nations were already here trading. So they built their trading fort, which is now Fort Victoria or Victoria Settlement Provincial Historic Site. They built a trading post. They were actually having trouble with the First Nations. They went back to the Red River Colony in what is now Manitoba and invited the Métis people to come further west and settle on this land base. So the major highway, the North Saskatchewan, is on our south side, but right cutting through what's now Métis Crossing is Victoria Trail. And that was the first road that was ever built between Fort Carlton and Fort Edmonton. And the Métis people settled this. So the first people to build a house, raise a crop, have their animals here were the Métis people. The next group of people to come were the Ukrainians.
Isn't that something? That's another thing amongst the many things that most Canadians don't appreciate about Métis, or for that matter about Ukrainians, because my grandmother would not know about any Ukrainians in Alberta when she was living in Winnipeg all those years, is the breadth of the geography of Canada that the Métis have influenced, or even pioneered effectively, with routes going all the way because of the fur trade to Montreal, right? And we're trying in the book to try to bring that a little bit to light so people have a better appreciation for that. When I was in Smoky Lake, I got up and I went to the church, and there was in terms of talking about the Ukrainian history, there was a monument there to the Ukrainian Canadian Women's Society of Smoky Lake, and going back to 1927, with all the names of everybody who was in that organization right up to like 1990. So how do you feel, Len, about that history and that mixing? Because that's quite extraordinary. It's very unique, that you get the Ukrainians working with the Métis in this area the way that Juanita's described it.
I thought she covered pretty good. I just know basically I was at the cemetery yesterday. My dad lived to the ripe age of 95 and a half years old, and we had a 40-day memorial for him yesterday. My grandfather was born in 1892. And I was looking at his monument, and I was looking at my great-grandfather, and I said, the pioneers, and I looked through the whole cemetery, and there's very few people who were born in the late 1800s. And basically it's amazing, because he's one of the pioneers. And my dad was one of the last pioneers in our community, just recently left us 40 days ago. But again, the Ukrainians and the Métis been here for early 1900s. 1906, they settled land up here. They come in late winters. I mean, they worked hand in hand. From boring a horse or to hunt or trading meat, it was like the trading post, and they all worked together. And it's just amazing, the history.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I thought now we'll end by jumping ahead, put you both on the spot. You could each let us know what do you see, what's your ideal future? I mean, you've already kind of touched on it, Juanita, when talking about tourism and so on, but I mean, I don't think you see this as being like Disney. It doesn't seem to have that kind of vibe at all, especially when you have a real river running through it. And people in Disney, they're all afraid of the crocodiles, so if they came here, they'd probably feel the same way. They'd be afraid of something. So, but what do you see? Because in Canada, I think about comparables, and there really isn't comparables. You can ski in Banff, you can go to Anne of Green Gables and Prince Edward Island, but then what are you going to do after that 15 minutes is up? You can go to Old Montreal, you can go up to CN Tower. Everything's such a singular event, So I'll ask you, and then Len, how do you feel about your prospect for the future of this location, and with the bison for them as well?
Huge dreams for Métis Crossing, and I think I'll back up a little bit again. And so in the very early days after the M&A bought the property, I did a lot of engagement and consultation with our people, our elders, our youth, our artists, our makers, our entrepreneurs, and asked them, what do you envision Métis Crossing being? And in some ways, I think that we have exceeded some of that original vision. But something that they said to me very early on is Métis Crossing exists. The spirit of the land, the footsteps of our ancestors, it is all already there. All you have to do is make it accessible to the public. So that's kind of been in my head every step of the way, every decision that's made. It's that we don't want to create a Disney. We don't want to create anything that's not real, because it is real. It is here. So we are very purposeful in creating very deep, meaningful, authentic experiences of the Métis culture here. Through our food, through our land, through our animals, and through our most recent addition, the skies. So we really look at it as Wikotuin. We are all related, and how do we share that, our kinship with the land, our kinship with the animals, with the skies, with the water? How do we share that out so that other people can learn from us? And I think a really important part of that is I talk a lot about Métis Crossing being a tool for reconciliation, not in terms of a day that we recognize and acknowledge history, But I know that we've talked a lot about the relationship between the Ukrainians and the Métis, and it's not perfect. There are people out there who don't have wonderful experiences of Métis history with them. But I have to say that Len walking around talking about us, sitting down in the gas station, sitting down in the coffee shop, and when they start to say negative things about us as Indigenous people, Len says, hang on, I work with these guys every day, and what you're saying is not the reality. So I think that reconciliation part of what we're doing as we walk through this community, not only participating in tourism and the visitor economy, but really leading it in this region, we build relationships with our entrepreneur partners, our government partners, our municipal partners. And to me, that's what it's about. It's about fundamentally changing worldviews of who the Métis people are.
That's quite remarkable. It really is, because I think Canadians have been grappling quite a lot with this notion of what reconciliation means. Is it Orange Shirt Day? Is it one day that you do one thing? And I don't think that was the intention of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I don't think that was the contention of the calls to action. But if you can go to a place and even pay money to go to a place because you're going to get an experience there like here that you would benefit from on your vacation time, and have that education and that cultural crossover and maybe learn the history, then that's just hugely advantageous. Len, last question to you. You've been here your whole life. I'm guessing you're not planning to decamp anytime soon off to the Dominican Republic. So what would you like to see here? Would you like to see the herds grow? Would you like to see a lot of people come? Or would you like to see Métis Crossing land base expand? And what would be your vision for moving forward?
Dave, basically, my vision, my dream, and this is right from the heart, is we talked about my great-grandparents coming, my grandfather, and we're going back 5 generations. And we're talking back 130 years, 125 years, people come here today. But we are going to do the same history, because there'll be a day I will be gone. Dave, you'll be gone too. But we can go back 100 years, and the people can talk about, I remember when Métis Crossing and Vision, Hopes, and Dreams, they did this wildlife park, and they brought bison back. It could be 100 years later, and they can talk about my great-grandfather or my great-great-grandfather, my grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren, can say, my grandfather sat with the Métis people, and they brought this bison and introduced everything, and we're going to give them history. And I guarantee you, 100 years from now, this place will be still here, and people will come from all over the world, and we're going to make history. And it's like introducing the bison, because this might be the only bison herds around. But my whole goal is to introduce bison to the Métis nations. There's land to be had, and we can introduce the bison back. But the whole idea is to make this vision, this dream, to all come true. But how long is it going to go? It's going to go on forever. And people will come from miles and miles around to see it.
Len and Juanita, thank you so much for your time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode.